But now we're going to do a corner turn away and look at the grid infrastructure. At the end of the day, we're moving into this electricity for everything world, aren't we? And is the grid infrastructure going to be fit for purpose? To give us some legal and regulatory perspectives, please welcome Astrid Brunt, General Counsel for International and European Affairs at Statnett. Astrid.
So I'm going to talk about three things: complexity, grid, and regulation. So what we've talked about this morning is the integration of Europe being the world's largest integrated market. It's been a continuous process since the early 90s. It's the green transition necessary to deliver the sustainability goals, combating the climate change. This transformation has led to instability, both in security of supply and prices. The digitalization helps us to deliver the integration and the transformation. However, from a legal and regulatory perspective, it's massive and it's hard to keep oversight. One particular issue is that we have massive legal packages on electricity, on climate, and on digitalization, all at the same time. And they all interplay. So I'm wondering who, apart from Alexia and other virtual engines, who have the oversight on all of this. If we go to the grid, this picture illustrates the enormous plans to build offshore wind. We are planning to build in Norway an offshore system at the same size of the system that we spent 100 years to build onshore. We have barely started. This system needs to be coupled to the grid on land. And it's intermittent. So it needs flexibility, whether that flexibility is hydrogen or demand response or whatever. But in order to have a continuous flow of electricity, this grid needs something. This picture illustrates demand for connection in Norway. As you will see, it's an enormous increase in demand connection. Only 70% in production. The question is, why is that? Is it one answer, or maybe several? This picture illustrates the old and the new production structures in the Nordics, where you see the left picture is the old one, with the old congestion line. The one to the right is the green shift, where you see the main change is lots of wind in Denmark, it's lots of wind in North Sweden, and it's a close down of nuclear in Sweden, and nuclear in Finland, of course. The shift creates new congestions. It takes a lot longer to build infrastructure than to build production or consumption. So, how do we solve this? I guess how to meet production and consumption with new grid and how to coordinate it, it's still a chicken and egg question. This picture just shows the massive investment in grid that's planned in Europe and in Norway, where most of the grid development is planned in the lower voltage distribution grid. Infrastructure, as I said, it takes longer to build than the increase of consumption or production. It applies everywhere. You've seen here I say acceptance. I've put up NIMBY. You're all familiar with that, but I don't know if all of you are familiar with a banana. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. That's the kind of frustration we get when we think that we can't get things done. But acceptance is key. It's also key to have a regulation that facilitates efficient development. But the regulation cannot solve the acceptance issue. But without acceptance, particular local acceptance in a democracy, you will not be able to build anything. So it's very important to have a system that facilitates just both approval process, but also acceptance for the development. The infrastructure challenge is not something that's made up. It's real, it's international, and it's here today. This slide just quotes a press release from the Dutch regulator, ACM, who recently recognized the scarcity in grid capacity, and it allows the Dutch electricity companies to deviate from the old first-come, first-served principle, and it makes it possible for Dutch grid companies to prioritize projects with a social function. I think the most important of this is the recognition that grid is a scarcity, and it is a scarcity today. I'm just mentioning the IRA from a legal perspective. And why do I do that? Well, as a starting point, it is massive, it's 700 pages, but it works instantly and it has effects. If it has the desired effects is another question, but it is very efficient. How does that compare to Europe? In Europe, we have shared structures, particularly in the energy field, between the EU Commission on one side and the member states. And the legislation is very cumbersome because it has to be transposed into national legislation. And according to the European Court of Auditors, the European Commission has chosen a way which is more complex, with a more detailed regulation than what was necessary. So this very detailed and very complex regulation is what we're facing. Maybe with what we've heard earlier today, the new legislation, the new Industry Act can be more efficient, but it's indeed massive legislation packages, and it's tough for Europe to deal with. So how does that take us to Norway? Well, we have to talk about the EEA agreement. Norway having an EEA agreement with the EU, which is important, but the backlog is an issue. In the electricity market, Norway was one of the first movers globally, the first to liberalize the sector. Implementing the two first packages didn't take us anywhere. That was easy to do. In 2009, when the third package came, it took Norway 9 years to transpose it into the national legislation. After that, we've had the Green Deal, the Fit for 55, the Repower EU, the emergency interventions. None of that is transposed into Norwegian law. Post-Brexit, post the Ukrainian war, the political landscape has shifted, and it's important to be aware of this regulatory challenge, the backlog going forward. Because this, for Norway, comes on top of the massive and complex European legislation in the field. My time is up. I have a last slide, and my proposal is, where does it take us? Well, in such a complex electricity and regulatory world and the system, maybe old questions will have new answers. And I'm pleased for you to help on that. Thank you for your attention.